My name is Francisco Ingham. I'm the founder of Pampa Labs, and I like my coffee with milk and with sugar and warm, not too hot, not too cold.
Welcome back to another MLOps community podcast. I am your host, Dimitrios. Today, we talked about what it means to be LLM native. We got into it with Fran all about this very topic, and I feel like there were a few tangents we went on, but we kept coming back to why it is so important. Let's get into this conversation with Francisco, and as always, if you enjoy this podcast, just share it with one friend. That's all I ask. For those that are watching on camera, I am looking pasty white because I put on zinc sunscreen now that I am under the sun, and that means it doesn't come off that easy, as I just found when I tried to get ready for the podcast. I'm joined here by my man Francisco, who is a self-proclaimed literature geek. And since you're living in Argentina, as they like to call it, I want to ask you, have you been reading much Gabriel Garcia Marquez?
I would say I've been reading more Borges than Garcia Marquez. He's kind of the representative of Argentinian literature. But I really also enjoy just international good writers like English, Russian, German.
So,
But yeah.
Wait, so what got you into that?
It's one of those things, kind of like a soul match where it resonates with you. Some authors just speak at a level that really talks to your soul, and it's funny because I very much enjoy language in all its aspects, but the way you use language to write poetry or literature is very different than when you process it in a chatbot, right? So it's two very different worlds, and I try to keep them very separate because one is sacred, and the other one is more utilitarian.
You don't want those chatbots to taint all of this beautiful poetry that's been written for centuries.
Yeah, no, I can't handle when they show in Twitter a poem written by LLM, and it's it doesn't get even close.
It doesn't work. It does not work like that. So you've been talking a lot about becoming an LLM native company. I wanted to ask you first and foremost, what does that even mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a term that I've been thinking a lot about, and what I think I think we as a community need to come to terms with what it really means for all of us, because there can be more than one definition. My definition is a company that understands how to leverage LLMs anywhere that they fit, basically. Some people use LLM native to talk about products, so products that have LLMs integrated in a seamless way. And some other people talk about LLM native people that can leverage LLMs to do their work better and have their day-to-days enhanced by using LLMs in the right way. I think companies should be doing both. So it really encompasses both sides of the spectrum for me.
Yeah. Dude, it's funny you mentioned that, try and plug in LLMs wherever they fit, because I've been thinking a lot about how you have certain jobs that have different pieces of output that they need to give. Maybe it's the marketing department. They need to be producing content, and some of the content can fall under case studies, some of the content can fall under blogs, others can fall under podcasts. And I'm not saying that you just go to ChatGPT and you ask it to write you a blog about XYZ topic, because that's not going to get you very far. But if you know what your output you need is, then you know you have a process for how you create that output. Are there places along the production line that you can plug in an LLM? Maybe it's the research for the podcast. Maybe it is uploading. Maybe it's even listening to the podcast, the transcription, and being able to suggest good titles. All of that are ways that you can plug into LLM. But if you have the LLM do the podcast for you, some people are trying it and cool, but it's not my favorite way to listen to podcasts, right? So I really appreciate this idea that you're talking about of find where you can plug it in and then use it in that place.
Absolutely. That's very important for me. I think you can fall to both sides. You can over implement LLMs, or you can under implement LLMs. And I think there is a sweet spot, and it takes some experimentation. Sometimes you're trying to force. Sometimes you need to force it to just like see if it actually works, and then you say like, no, it's more work using LLMs than doing it myself. That's when you need to back off. But I think broadly speaking, any kind of creative work and decision making is at least has a very great delta in quality if a human being does it, at least. And I would venture to say in most cases, LLM cannot do it well at all. So you can have AI generated content, but it will always be low quality. People will like the reason why we listen to podcasts and like the good podcast and read books and everything is because we want to find those unique insights that are not obvious and are not like, a statistic representation of a training set. We want unique perspectives on things, and the way we choose the podcast we want to listen is like we kind of vet the people that we think have these unique perspectives. So I think that must stay, and we must enhance that so that people can do more podcasting or more decision making and more creative work and less operative stuff. So like broadly speaking, anything operational is where I think we should all have this callback inside of our minds that says like, hey, this is a place where LLMs at least could be applied. Let's see if this is a place where if I apply LLMs, it actually saves me time. It doesn't take me more time.
Sure. Have you seen different places that are surprising in your own life where you recognized, oh, I could probably figure out how to use an LLM for this?
What we do at Pampa with the team is like we purposefully force LLMs in some places and we see if it sticks. So what we do now is we're doing like an office agent that can help us do random stuff that we do every day. So just to give you an example, we order food every day and we need to ask everyone like, what do they want? So like we're building this WhatsApp agent that everyone can write to, and then the person that is going to order just asks, it gives the list of what it needs to order, and then we send that to a restaurant. We're also evaluating having the LLM write to a restaurant directly. So these kinds of things, or for example, when we have expenses that people, spend something for the whole team, and then we need to do that splitwise thing at the end of the month. Same thing. We have this agent, we write all the expenses, and then we resolve that at the end of the month with another chat, right? So these kinds of things is places where we are actively thinking of, could this be done with an LLM? And then when we try it out, we see if it's actually more work or less work for us. But sometimes it's actually very useful.
And when you say agent, and also in these use cases, like, couldn't that be done with just pure automation and heuristics? So explain to me why you need to plug in an LLM in there.
For many use cases, you can do automation if you have, if the input is structured enough. So like if you make a UI where you have like select how much money you spent, which were the people involved, which is kind of what the apps do, like a Splitwise will do that. Definitely you can do automation. You don't need like an interpretative layer there. And the only advantage there is like being able to just send a voice note and unstructured message and not having to spend time typing and, selecting the right things. But it might be, in some use cases, it might be like a small delta compared to the work it takes to actually build it and maintain it. But in some other use cases, for example, ordering it from a restaurant, it might be harder because sometimes the menu changes. So you need to keep a track of like the menu of all the restaurants around to be able to select. Actually, maybe you could write it down. So yeah, I think it's mainly the convenience of being able to write unstructured information from the platform that you're already using for everything. So the cost of actually interacting is very low, because you don't have like 3 apps for 3 different things, and you don't need in our case, like we are tech savvy and we like technology, but some people, they don't want to be learning how to use each app again and again with all this like massive set of features. So it's kind of streamlines all your interactions with utilities in a natural language input.
Well,
you can do it with automation as well.
But it's interesting to think about too, that you mentioned the delta there and how you are able to quickly spin something up that uses LLMs versus if you were to do it with automation, maybe it would even take you longer to figure that out. Can you talk to me about how like your development process now, throwing something to an LLM looks like? Like, how does that whole development go? And then how do you ultimately make the choice? Like, is this worth it? Is this not? I don't know.
So the development process, there's many levels to how we can discuss this. A big part of it is just like having an agent that has tools, and those tools like are structure output, and the structure output is processed in the backend, and that does things for you. So basically, write read operations in these use cases that I've been discussing, and streamlining all of that into one agent that has all these tools instead of having different apps. So that's kind of like a basic architecture of how an agent like this looks like. But then in terms of how we develop, we also try to use like LLMs to develop, right? Like many developers are doing, and try to take that to the limit. So like being, cursor power users, and like trying to spend less time writing code and more time thinking about what the right abstractions are and like what actually do we want to build. And then once you have, and this is an example of like a proof of concept or MVP that we did for ourselves, but once like you're actually doing something, some real development that needs some assurances in production that many people are going to be using it, and you need quality, then you have like this whole data flywheel evaluation, which you probably discussed this a lot of times, but we try to be progressively more systematic in the way we do our evals. So depending on the maturity of the product, we start with typical vibe checks, then we do like a very small evaluation set that is integral to the whole solution. And then as this grows and it scales and we have more evidence that there's demand for something like this, we start doing evaluations for all the different modules within the solution, which can or may not include LLMs in terms of the evaluators. One thing that we have as a concept internally is that we try to do evaluations as much as possible that don't include LLMs. Like we try to have evaluations be non-stochastic as much as possible. So for example, we would evaluate the input of a tool, right? Which is a strict thing, except if it's a query, like RAG, in which case you need to do either semantic similarity or an LLM. But many tools, you just need to have the right parameters given an input, and then you don't need an LLM to test that. For the whole system, you usually need an LLM because it's just text in the output, and to evaluate text, you kind of need an LLM. But we can do a lot without an LLM by evaluating the different modules in the application. But for something that's more mature, when we have something we're playing around with, we don't evaluate, we just do vibe checks and we try it out ourselves. We are our own users.
What is the point? Like, how do you know that this has gone from vibe check to now being, we need to actually like point the evaluation guns at this?
I see it as it is worth investing in something proportionally to the evidence that you have that is actually useful. And it's actually settled that that's the direction you will follow. Because sometimes when you're starting out and you're getting to know your users, you are kind of iterating on what the final architecture of your solution will look like, because you don't really know what they need. So at that point, you don't have a lot of evidence. And so like an investment in your evaluation suite doesn't really make sense to be so large, because it might change. And if it changes, then the evaluations you made for your tools might not be worth anymore, might not be useful because the tools change themselves. So if you start getting some traffic and the incentive to have an optimized solution, so for example, you're changing your model you're trying to reduce your prompt or refactor your prompt into smaller sub-agents. Like when cost or latency starts becoming a thing, because you want to do the same utility, but in the scaling of the solution, you need to start having more strict requirements. That's usually the point where evals start being important, because every optimization effort that you do, you need to measure, and it's very hard to measure many changes with just 5 checks. So it's basically like the requirements for optimizations come hand in hand with more strict evals for us.
And do you have a way to track all of these optimizations that you're tweaking?
Yeah.
Or really they're experiments to try and optimize, right? So you're experimenting with many different things, and then you want to be able to know that, okay, when all the knobs are turned at these different degrees, we get the best output.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is basically necessary to have an evaluation set to be able to track whether an optimization effort was successful, because you need to be able to make the claim that regardless of whether the cost went down, the latency went down, the accuracy stayed mostly the same. So the only way you can really say that to a stakeholder that is not part of the engineering team, like a manager, is that the accuracy was not affected, and you need to show that. So you need an evaluation set, at least an end-to-end integrate, like what we would call like an integration test for the whole system, where you say like these answers seem similar to what we had before, and now we can do this at a lower cost based on this architectural change or this decreasing the prompt or whatever. So the way we would track this is we usually use Langsmith, just because we are partners with the team, and we like product a lot. So we would have a data set with input outputs. We would run the different experiments against that data set within a notebook. So we would have different notebooks where we track the experiment, and we have the metric at the end, which is also tracked in the UI. So we would keep these notebooks as records of experiments. And if we can keep like the successful experiments where we can keep the accuracy steady, and we manage to decrease cost or latency significantly. Yeah.
But so when you're dealing with these agents, there's different steps along the whole end-to-end system, right? And you were talking about being able to play with tools and then going out and doing things. If you are changing the settings on like the tools or the way that it interprets the tools and stuff like that, is that still captured in the notebooks on those experiments?
Yeah, absolutely. So that depends on how granular the evaluation sets are, right? Because the first step for us, we go from like the major to the minor. So first thing is like a vibe check, to just like, it's very low effort and high value, I would say, because you can kind of tell, at least in like the major, like in the 80% of happy path cases, it's not very good to test edge cases, because you might have unknown unknowns and you might miss stuff. But like on the strict like normal flow, you can test if something is seriously wrong by playing around with it. So that's like high value, low effort. Then having like a full end-to-end evaluation test, which we run every time we make a change. That's also medium effort, but also super high value, because we start to test these edge cases, and we consider these in the data set. So it raises a flag when some edge case is broken after a change. And then the last point is like high effort, and I would say depending on the maturity, it can be high value, but only if you have like a mature product. Then we start making these small evaluation sets for each tool, right? Where you have where you can test the functionality, like what would be a unit test of that specific component, and that you would have in the notebook. So then you would have you make a change to your agent, and then you would evaluate on all these small parts of your system plus the whole integrated system.
So this is fascinating, and that comes last. Once you've recognized, I really appreciate how you are saying, don't spend all this time on things that you're probably going to throw out anyway. So just do the vibe check, make sure that it's running, and then slowly peel back the onion.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, invest in proportion to the evidence that you have that your architecture is going to stay that way. And then you start having more granularity in the types of analysis that you can make on the performance of your system, because you can tell like if it failed, where it failed, right? And go directly there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So you did mention something before that I want to keep like pulling the thread of, which is you try not to do LLMs as judge. And it's funny because I literally was reading Eugenian's summary of like 40 different LLMs as judge papers and all the different ways you can use LLMs as a judge. And you're saying like, yeah, the conclusion is if you don't have to, don't use it.
Yeah. So I think this kind of, and this extends, this is a more general conclusion, which is if you can, if you can do it without an LLM, it's kind of paradoxical, but if you can do it without an LLM, do it without an LLM. It's kind of contradictory, because before I said like try to use LLMs wherever you can, but the point is the places where you insert LLMs must be places where it will be hard to do that without an LLM. But now with LLMs, that's possible, and it was not possible before. So for example, structuring unstructured input, that's something that you need an LLM for, and it helps you automatize a process, and you couldn't do that before. So that's the sweet spot where like, okay, you would get a lot of value out of inserting an LLM, and you pay, that stochasticity cost of knowing that these results can be probabilistic and not always work according to the plan. And you can obviously make a lot of verification and take a lot of measures to have quite a bit of assurance of what that output would look like. But at the end of the day, even if you use structured output, the values themselves are stochastic. So you have some kind of uncertainty of how that will work in each new interaction. But the reason why we try not to use LLM as a judge where possible is that it has this stochasticity aspect, which doesn't give us a clear view of whether the system is working correctly or not, because it changes with each run. So you don't have this stable measurement of performance where you say like, okay, you can do like a some kind of Monte Carlo analysis where you run many times, but even then you need to prompt the LLM correctly, and you need to evaluate your evaluator. So there's a lot of meta work to make LLM as a judge to work appropriately, which sometimes is necessary, and that's where it fits for me. Like if you can't do it without, for example, when you have like an end-to-end agent that has a natural language answer to the user, it's very hard to test that with just rules. So LLM as a judge would make sense, but only there. Like if you can avoid in other parts of your system to have LLMs evaluate your input as much as possible, it gives you much more control over your evaluations if you have rule-based evaluations.
And are you doing any specific kind of LLM as a judge when you do use it?
I'm honestly not familiar with all the kinds there are. So I'll tell you like kind of what I usually try to do, which is like basically having either I read the blog post. I like the fact of having a binary output instead of like a gradient of real numbers.
Yeah.
So I like that approach of having, this is the ideal answer. This is what answer is. Is this a correct match, or which of these two is a better answer? Like that type of comparison is interesting to me, and I like it. And the other option is just like having a reference answer and having like some things that you want to assure, like the style is kind of similar, or the answer has the same content, broadly speaking, and having like measurements for each of these things, and having different evaluators for each of the aspects you want to analyze, which are not strictly derivable by rules. So depending on the use case, we will do one or the other. I don't have like a strict position taken on what the best way of doing it is. It depends on the use case.
Nice. So what other kind of shit are you using agents for?
One thing I am so this is like what I'm telling you about trying to force agents and see if it works, if it sticks. One thing I've been trying and failing at is like, we do a podcast every single week in Spanish for like the Spanish AI engineer community. And I've been trying to use agents to create presentations. Like I've tried every single solution out there, like Gamma and like Slides.io, which integrates with Google Slides. There's a few of them. They haven't been helpful for me.
But presentations for what? For your podcast? Like after you've created the podcast, then you want a presentation from the information?
So it's more, it's not so much as a podcast, but like a live stream where we, from Pampa, we explain a specific concept and then we open up for Q&A. So it has a presentation part, then it has a demo part, and the presentation part is using slides. So many times I have the content in my head and I don't want to design. So I'm just trying to find something that will give me good design out of like the structure that I already know I want to present. And I haven't been successful for that at least yet. Another thing that I try to do is use Raycast as you know Raycast?
No, what's this?
So Raycast is like a all-around Mac tool that has like a lot of shortcuts for Mac. But I think if you pay $10 a month, you can get AI integrated. So in any app, Slack, email, whatever, you can have your own custom shortcuts of like fix grammar or like make more formal, and you can prompt. You can make it your own LLM calls that you map to a certain shortcut. So for like some members of the team that have that want to improve the English, for example, or something like this, or when you just don't want to structure everything super specifically and you just want to jot it down and then like have a certain structure. I like using LLMs with humans in the loop and not like just expecting an end output, because it doesn't usually do a great job at like giving you the final output. It can get you like 70% of the way. So that's, I like to jot down things and then like have LLM structure them and then send them, for example. And another topic I am very passionate about is like these solutions that we call it internally like low command tab solutions that you don't need a lot of command tabs to get what you want. So not changing screens. Like you get, I am writing something in Slack, I can jot it down. I do a shortcut and it changes it right there. I don't need to go to ChatGPT, and then I can just press enter. Or Cursor is a great example as well, where you have like everything there. You don't need to move from there. You have every single LLM functionality, chat, autopilot, copilot, everything there, and then you can just push. So that's another good example, Raycast.
So that one's fascinating to me, because I remember when ChatGPT came out and people were saying like, this is going to change the world, right? And there was some folks that were talking about how there needs to be a new operating system, an AI operating system. And I didn't really understand what that means, and I still do not understand what that means. But then I saw some people talking about how chat can be your mission control. And if you have the agents, that you just are in the chat all the time, and the agents will go and do what you need them to do. I don't think it's reliable enough for that yet. And I also wonder if that whole assumption is flawed, where we're still going to be doing what we're doing in our specific places that we like to do them, a la Slack or Cursor, but the AI will come, or the chat will come to those places, as opposed to we're in the chat firing off commands of things that need to go and happen behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I myself, like, I think we all enjoy seeing things and like having interaction with things. So I don't think that's going anywhere. Just having like a white chat screen that feels sad to me in some way. It doesn't feel like a good experience. Whereas like having this like more integrated solution where you have chat, but you have lots of other things within the UI, feels less of a compromise and less of a trade-off and more of like an enhancement, right? And I've also seen the OS thing. I think Carpathy tweeted it back in the day. I don't understand it, but I think it's like, when Carpathy says something that you don't understand, it's obviously you. You are the problem. But
Yeah.
I really like, having chat within whatever I'm doing,
Uh-huh.
which is like the case with Cursor, right? Like I'm coding. I have an IDE. IDEs are still, a great thing, but I have an LLM enhanced IDE. So that's kind of also like the LLM native concept for me is whatever you are already, you can be an LLM enhanced that, right? So for example, this applies to traditional industries and for professions. So like it doesn't mean like if you do marketing that your marketing knowledge is obsolete. That the opposite. It's worth more than before. But now you can power that knowledge and get farther with that domain specific knowledge by using LLMs. And the same thing with, for example, a traditional company. If you have users and the users love what you do, you can serve them better because you know them better than other people and you know how to apply LLMs to serve them. So like domain-specific knowledge for me is like at an all-time high in value if and especially if you use LLMs to leverage that domain-specific knowledge, be it like
Yeah.
from the job side or from the product side. And this goes kind of against the narrative of like, every job or every product is going to be replaced by like LLMs. I don't think that's the case. It's all about experience, and then the experiences that have LLMs integrated in the right way will be enhanced, but not replaced. I think.
Yeah, my buddy Marcel likes to make the point that you still need to know what good looks like, or you still need to know what great looks like. And so it's basically saying if you're an SEO expert on the marketing team and the LLM does stuff for you and it gives you something, if you don't know what great looks like, then you're kind of sitting there and you're like, well, I guess it's good. Let's ship it. But if you know what great looks like, then you're going to be able to say, okay, we need to optimize these H1 tags. It looks like we didn't get the metadata right on this, all those things that the SEO folks like to talk about. Then you're going to see that and see where it's okay and where it's not okay, and then add your added value. But like you said, you get 70% of the way there, hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would add to that, like AI engineers don't know what a good SEO result looks like. We don't know what a good marketing result looks like. We don't know what is a good experience for the user in the construction industry. We don't know. So like it's not like we can just like automate away everything. These systems need direction, and the direction comes from knowing your users very well, which is the case with traditional industry. So that's where I see like this integration happening with like AI engineers, but like very, very close to the domain experts, right?
Yeah. Because your background is in data science, or it's...
I studied economics in college, and then I quickly moved on to like deep learning because I became fascinated with it. But like I have a hybrid background. Yeah.
And in your eyes, what is the difference, if any, between like a machine learning engineer and an AI engineer? Is it just a different name for the same kind of thing?
There's been a fair amount of debate on this topic about like what really are AI engineers, if they are something, right? I do believe there's like LLMs change things materially. It's not just like another algorithm, because it is an automation opportunity for everything that existed before. It's not like something that is like a module. It is transversal, like a capability. So the only thing I see different from AI engineers, which I would call the way I see it, and I don't like to get stuck to the terms. So like the way I see it is like you have different job roles. You have a data scientist, you have a machine learning engineer, like the traditional job roles, and you have a human resources expert, and all these jobs have like material expertise in a certain topic. For example, a data scientist needs to do good evaluations and needs to have like a good experimental process, because that's kind of your bread and butter, regardless of which algorithm you're using. So that stands apart from whether LLMs exist or not. And then maybe like what an AI engineer would be to me, and again, this is probably a definition thing, is somebody that can do AI with in an LLM-native way. So an AI engineer would be able to include LLM features in a product that they're building right? And they will be able to leverage LLMs in their own development process. So, but I don't see like AI engineers per se being like a job. For me, it's more like an enhancement of maybe like a data scientist, right? Which is like a data scientist that knows like the traditional machine learning topics like evaluation, metrics, right, experimental process, and they enhance that with LLM, and that's like a 2.0, LLM-native data scientist.
Because
That's the definition topic.
well, it's fascinating you say that, because the data scientist being on the hook for evaluation and experimentation, we were just talking about earlier, right? When you're building out your agent, one of the things that you're looking at is how do you experiment to bring down costs or latency, and how do you evaluate the effects of that experimentation? So it's it's fun to think about these things, because I know this topic has come up quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really in terms of evaluation, things have not changed that much. Maybe the metrics change, and you now need to understand how to have an LLM as part of your evaluation, right? Like as an LLM, as a judge, that's a new thing. But evaluation in itself has always been something you needed to do. And that's part of the data science process from forever. So having good evaluations, understanding what a training set means, what an evaluation set means, what a test set means, how many examples you should have in different evaluation sets, covering different aspects of how your solution might be used, right? Different types of inputs, and trying to get the ground truth for those inputs. That kind of thinking is basically science, right? It's a science mindset or scientist mindset, which doesn't really change. But what changed is that some modules of those evaluations behave differently. So you need to adapt and understand, the stochasticity behind them. But like, I see this a lot, like some people that come into AI now, and they are like prompt engineers or AI engineers. They have no background in doing science for a productive environment. So that kind of rigor is important, especially in the maturity in a maturity stage of a product. And you either need to learn it, or you need to bring that knowledge from like traditional machine learning experience, because it's not enough to just prompt and like throw an LLM at your outputs and wish for the best. Yeah.
You sound like you're talking from experience. You've seen the worst of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. Like, yeah, now with LLMs, we can build whatever, the bar is super low. Everyone can get in, like everyone can build a UI, in one day. That's all true, and it's fantastic for POCs. But then like when you start making these solutions that actually need to handle real users, and like the users will be using all this in like whole set of unexpected ways, you need some systematic process for improving your solution and finding improvement opportunities as well.
Yeah, it's the difference between you having that agent that takes your food orders just for your Slack versus creating an actual Slack bot that you put on to the Slack marketplace and let anyone use that.
Yeah. And like, I love the scrappy attitude of like, let's hack and, let's break things. But that's like a different mindset that you have when you're doing a product for like, an enterprise or like big company. It's very different. So I like having like my place to play, which is like the agents we use. I'm not like translating that mindset to everything,
Well, so talk to me when a client comes to you and they're like, all right, we need to do something with AI. Because I imagine they just come to you and say, we want to do AI stuff. Do they come with that broad of a vision, or do they generally have it mapped out in their head? Like, hey, we've got this use case and we think we could plug in some kind of LLMs.
It depends. Sometimes it's more of a blank slate with a vision where like, we would like to build this. We don't know where to start. in that case, usually what you do is like a POC, MVP, right? Throw it to some users, start learning from the users, and start working your way towards like a mature evaluation suite, like we discussed earlier. Sometimes it's already something that is production, and you're starting to scale. And then when you need to scale, the requirements, the technical requirements for a solution are different. You need more expertise in the table. So in that case, it's more about optimization than the 0 to 1. Usually clients do have some background in terms of they have people in the team that already have been researching into LLMs. They've been playing around with them themselves, right? Like they have background, and they want to be able to prioritize correctly and understand what is actually like a good thing to add to a solution versus like hype. A good example for this is RAG. Like RAG has an infinite assortment of variations and stuff you can do with RAG, super fancy things. But sometimes when you have a RAG pipeline, it's more about like understanding the nature of the data and thinking from that data what needs to be done to reach. You need to get deep into the use case. It's very hard to apply boxed solutions. There's just like an API that you can hit and have like great RAG. So many times it's more about exploration on the use case, understanding what exactly is the problem that the client is trying to solve, and then diving into. And that's also like why consulting makes sense, because if not, like you would just like buy a product, and there's many startups doing product for every single sort of thing. But many times you need, like, to get good performance, you need custom custom software, basically, like doing things tailored to your solution.
And can you explain the different spectrums that you see when it comes to RAG, on how you've done certain things for some folks, and once you've gotten intimate with the data, you recognize, okay, we should probably do this with this type of use case or with this type of data versus a different option or a different data / use case? You need to take a entirely different approach.
Yeah, it does really depend on the use case. Sometimes when you have like just documents and you want to answer a question based on documents, there's like all these questions about what are you embedding? Are you embedding the title? Are you embedding the content? What part of the content? Are you embedding a summary? Like all these options are on the table. What similarity, like what embedding space do you have? Which is the model creating your embeddings? Is this model a custom model, or is it like a pre-trained model? And all these kind of questions relate to what's going to happen when that query gets embedded and retrieving similar vectors. Like that similarity will be defined by the priors that your solution has in terms of how did you cut your documents, what did you embed, and what you retrieve. So asking those type of questions, if you have like a traditional RAG pipeline, is the first thing. And then if you start putting from there, many times you end up doing stuff that actually has a name, but you don't know. Like early in the early days, I was doing RAG and I didn't know what RAG meant. And like when people spoke about RAG, I was like, what are they talking about? And then I realized it's like, oh yeah, it's just like retrieval. So it's funny how like all these terms and all these like super big techniques come out, and it's just like sometimes it's more of a common sense approach to a certain use case. That's more for like retrieving the right documents. And then another big use case which has different requirements is extraction. So like if you have a very large document and you need to find that right paragraph or that piece of information that you're looking for it's different because the input is determined. You know what you're looking for. It doesn't depend on what the user says. You can have a certain amount of options, but it's usually like a limited list of data points that you want to obtain. And in that case, you can do much more science in terms of like you can even do like rules, specific keywords, right? Hybrid search of trying to get really good at like those finite list of terms that you try to find to extract the right values, the right data points. So that's like a different approach to a different use case.
First of all, I appreciate you breaking this down, because 100%, like I was going to go down the route of, I thought you just meant what kind of embedding model you're using, what kind of chunking strategy are you using, but that's just one side of the spectrum where all those questions come up. Then you go to the other side of the spectrum and basically you're saying it's a search problem, less than a retrieval problem. This is just like, hey, we're doing search and you're calling it AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a background in ranking and retrieval because I worked in recommendation systems in Mercado Libre, which was my previous company. And
shout out to Letox, who's been on here a few times.
Absolutely. For Letox and for Lina.
Lina and Javier, they all, the Mercado Libre team, they were instrumental in the early foundations of the MLOps community. And I think that's how we sparked up our conversation when we met, isn't it?
Yeah. So, and I was part of their team as well. So like, it's interesting how like it all crowds together. Yeah. So like for me, when I started thinking, because it all came from embeddings. I worked a lot in embeddings in Mercado Libre back in the day. So when I started understanding like embeddings were a key part of many of these agentic systems, it automatically rang a bell of everything I knew from those times, right? Vector spaces, latent spaces, custom embeddings, fine tuning when it makes sense, when it doesn't, and how you build, like how you purposefully define your latent space based on your problem. Which has like different variables that you can pull from. That was what really stuck for me. Like, okay, now this is the field we're playing on. We like embeddings, LLMs are outside, and now we're talking like latent space. Let's make this work, and then let's see how it interacts with the LLM. The only part that the LLM is involved in is like how it creates the query, which is basically prompting. But once you understand the types of queries that you want, you can treat the RAG system as like a separate part, right? And all these traditional retrieval questions are exactly the same. You're trying to find, a needle in a haystack. That's it.
Dude, that's fascinating to think. Just like it's almost all the same foundation, but then when you go to RAG, you've got the prompts. When you go to recommender systems, it's just a bit different. I'm not going to say abstraction, but like a little bit different spice involved when you're cooking up the different use cases.
Yeah. Maybe recommender systems, the input is given by a user directly, whereas in LLM RAG pipelines, many times the query is LLM generated. So there is a probabilistic aspect between the user and the retrieval system. But you still have like an undetermined input that needs to find the right needle in a haystack. I think it's actually an advantage, the fact that you have an LLM in the middle, because you can kind of clear the whatever the user did like in a very untidy way, which is like how users and myself, like how you use technologies, like you're untidy if it works. So you have that like adaptative layer where you can like kind of clean whatever is coming in the input, versus in traditional recommender systems, you just have what you have. This is the input that the user told you. If they missed a keyword or something, you're stuck with that. If it's misspelled, whatever. Sometimes obviously semantic models can account for that, but sometimes having a cleaner input helps to make good retrieval, and also it helps in terms of evaluation, because you kind of, with the LLM, you can control what type of input you get, and then you can build a better evaluation set with that in mind.
Well, it's funny too, you mentioned that in this specific example, you're saying the user is giving you information where they're probably typing in a search bar what they want, and let's say that it's at Mercado Libre and I'm looking for some new high heels, not for myself, for my wife, of course. And then I get a bunch of recommendations that are saying like, maybe I want blue, or maybe I want stilettos, whatever it may be. But I find it fascinating too with the recommender systems that you don't really get in the RAG. Again, this is because it's a different spice, but the engine is the same. in the recommender system, you can use these features of, oh, hey, he hovered over that picture for a little bit. We should maybe show a few more of these blue stiletto heels. And, oh, he also was asking about whatever, turquoise dresses. Maybe we should try and show him a turquoise heel that will go with that. And again, not for myself. I don't like to wear stiletto heels or turquoise dresses. I just hang out with 3 women because I've got 2 daughters and a wife.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to consider. And like, I think specifically now, like how e-commerce recommendations systems will work with LLMs on the table is going to be a very interesting development in the field. I'm already seeing stuff that I really enjoy.
What have you been seeing?
So like, the Shopify agent that you can just like ask. So what I really like is like you can have like these fuzzy filters where you can say like, yeah, I like it a little bit a darker red, right? There's been papers written on this before the LLM era, which I like because I really enjoyed the e-commerce problem, like Fashion Clip. That is like being able to transverse the latent space with this kind of like latent variables, like how dark the color is, for example, which is not something you can filter for, obviously.
Yeah.
So those kinds of queries start to feel a lot like, a real sales experience versus just like an e-commerce site. So that's super interesting to me. And that really, as you were saying, like what you can use to find the right product is like a very wide spectrum of multimodal data, because you have all this navigation information and the hover information, like everything can be part of whatever you do to retrieve the right products. So like there's a lot of information that you need to prioritize how you're going to incorporate into your system in the recommendation system. So it's a very interesting problem.
Yeah, I've also heard folks that are using LLMs to help them get different feature ideas for their recommender systems, but I haven't. So I look at that like as during the training part of the whole recommender system. I haven't seen anyone quite marry the LLM up front for the user where you can just talk to it. But now that you're talking about this Shopify agent, I do like that idea where you're talking to it. And so if I'm understanding it correctly, you're getting shown stuff and you can say, yeah, I want something like this, but with a darker shade or a different color.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can ask, it will show you a few options and you can continue the discussion, which is very compelling for me.
And this brings up just, for me, the thinking around this is very similar to a presentation that we had, I don't know, like 6-8 months ago from Linus. And he was talking about the different ways that you can have interfaces with LLMs. And you see it a lot at Notion where he used to work. And Notion has the ability to click and it gives you kind of like a short list of things that you're going to want to ask. Because in his presentation, he was saying, we've already got the mouse and the ability to click. And so not all the time do we want to be chatting, trying to ask more of whatever it is that we're looking at. We just want a drop-down menu with maybe 5 options, and we click on one of those. Or we can, if we need to, continue chatting.
Yeah.
And so I find that interface fascinating too, on how, all right, if we can get something that is only a click away, it's much easier to click on something as opposed to write out, even if it is writing just 1 or 2 words.
Absolutely. And I think this touches probably the key topic here for any company dealing with LLMs, which is like you're pulling from the experience. right? Whatever you do in terms of features or your implementations, you're pulling from a vision of what a great experience looks like. And it needs to be that way. Like you can't be like non-LLM dogmatic or LLM dogmatic. You want to do everything with chat, or or we don't want to do any LLM features, even in the backend. Like it's all about like giving a great experience, and that requires like the pragmatism of like having all these assortment of tools and using them to. And it takes a lot of experimentation as well with the users, but this is like the path I like to see companies going, where they are trying out things and suddenly they find these amazing experiences, that were impossible before, but they are not like dogmatic in any kind of way. It's just like the right combination for that kind of user. And that's like the layer 2 of solutions, right? The foundation layer, we've seen a lot of developments. Like now it's how do we get these LLMs working for the 90% of people that don't care about technology? And they don't want to know what's going on behind the scenes. They don't want to know. They just like help me solve my problem with a great experience. So that's what I really like to see happen.